I drive by it all the time.
Do you?
So oh, by the way,
I watched that show, I was doing a project on the beach right south of there. In an apartment.
That's a TV show, right?
The guy
I
wrote.
went to one scene, he's like in the little
What?
blow up tub, like drinking a margarita.
I forget the name.
It's on tomorrow night.
It's right on the beach. I forget the name of the community.
Show looks a little bit like
Older buildings, we do some real.
Yeah, but this is like a straight like comedy. It's a still.
You have idea. You have a couple out parcels still available?
We have two.
Actually, I went one day I was passing back. I met a nice guy who works for the property management division.
What's his
A
name?
guy. This was a while back, and he was at the Pollo Tropical. I stopped in there for lunch, and he was in there. Shock guy. I forget his name though. Black guy. I think he was
but it's chilly.
but shock guy. Some of the black community, a couple
Okay,
down
so
in
first we
Atlanta.
fill in everybody. Right.
Joe, but I was actually thinking, is there
You know how much
economically feasible way?
Do you know how much the fill would be? I have
No, not filling it, like over here in the Lakeshore region in Miami, to build like an industrial site on stilts, like 8-foot stilts.
No, dude, it's like all the construction costs for that, just the foundation and piles alone is like
Files.
Yeah, but think
for
about it.
industrial building.
Like,
Industrial building,
nothing.
I know, but most industrial buildings aren't.
Are you gonna give us a sense of like what's totally the cost? Construction cost?
I was going to talk a lot about
And how do the water rights work on that? Who actually owns
and I
that
have
water?
a lot of photographs from during construction and talking about
Government?
I think it's
that
state.
Yes, so how do
and I
you,
have one slide on the costs and then
and then you're gonna ask the question, all right, if he's doing it, then, you know, you gotta let everyone else do that, and you're gonna have to be finished. So we should build houses on this.
Whatever, just put still signs.
We go over everything.
Put a concrete grid.
Hey man, that's gotta be for like, you know, waves and stuff.
Bigger stilts. I don't know, man.
Hey, listen, I like this. T-money. I do.
No, actually.
and at the time of the year, 2009.
Starving.
I didn't mind it, we had them every other weekend. So we had Friday night, all day Saturday.
Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So our final speaker this afternoon, Jessica Jolie, she is a graduate of the MSRED program. She also serves on our advisory board. She currently works with Styles Development as a real estate development project manager. I've asked her to come in and talk about one of her projects, and so I think she's going to talk about maybe even more than one, but specifically Westlake Commons, which is obviously a retail center. And one of the things that I asked you to do, I sent out an email obviously earlier this week as an extra credit assignment for those of you that were interested in putting together kind of a front door, back door analysis on this site. And I provided you with the site plan along with some other background information. I think most of you took me up on that offer of extra credit. So what we're going to do is after Jessica finishes her presentation and kind of gives you a lot of the information about the project, then I have at least a couple of you come up and kind of go through what you came up with and sort of see how it correlates directly with what the actual costs were, what the rental rates were, that sort of thing. Okay? So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jessica.
So, yes, thank you all for having me. I wanted to talk about this project today and just real estate development project management in general. This was a project I started working at Styles in February of 2012, and it was perfect timing because we had just put this piece of property under contract for purchase. So I had the opportunity to go through a project all the way from the very beginning, all the way to the end, which the Publix opened on April 24th of this year, and I still kind of deal day to day with some of the closeout items with the project. So it's right over here at 1700 Sheridan Street. It's on the southeast corner of Sheridan and US 1. And for many, many years, it was an old automotive dealership. It was owned by Holman Automotive, and they were consolidating, and they, shut down their location, and we purchased the property, and it was 13.5 acres. Well, we started with 14.5, but then once we gave away everything to the county that they asked for, we ended up with 13.5. So I just wanted to talk about, and this is particularly to Stiles itself, how we work with the different roles in the different departments in order to get a project done. So we do have a department, it's called our Real Estate Investment Services, and they're sort of land brokers, and they're sort of charged with identifying a piece of land that's for sale or a development opportunity for us, developing relationships with potential users, and kind of putting something together. And then once we know that we have a deal, that's when they hand it off to us in development to execute it. So, they identified this site, they put it under contract, and they brokered an early deal with Publix, who ended up being our anchor tenant. They had a site across the street that was an operating store, and it was very old, and it was prone to flooding, and so Publix themselves chose to close that location and then open a new store with us across the street.
How old was it?
I mean, their lease was up, so I guess it was between 20 and 30 years old. So then once they hand over the project to my department, we work in development, and we serve as the owner's representative during the development, and that's from the time we put the land under contract all the way until we have a CO and we close it out. So I myself have worked with many different consultants, and I listed them all to the left, starting with the architects, the brokers, I have leasing agents, they tasked. I work primarily only in retail development and grocery anchored shopping centers. So I have worked with my brokers, and they're tasked with finding tenants for me. I work with my civil engineers, my traffic engineers were required to get a traffic study and submit that to the county. Risk managers, what are the proper insurances that we need during construction and then once the project's operating. Surveyors, which I can get into later. We had a lot of surveying challenges on this property because the property was very old. It had been owned by the same company or family since the 1950s, which in South Florida, that's for it to never change hands until now is a long time. I dealt with the municipalities, which included the planning department and the building department in the city of Hollywood. The engineering and utility companies, including FP&L, TICO, bring utilities to the site, the city commission, and then the county, because we actually had to plat the land. It had never ever been platted before, which was another story in itself. I had to deal a lot with the surrounding neighbors. We had, here, if I go back to maybe this site here, you see we had a lot of single family homes here to the south, and we had to work with them individually, and then we had a large condo association over there to the east. So I had to go meet with them, give them newsletters, updates on the project, and deal with a lot of complaints, and we had a lot of them. And not anything in particular, just what you deal with, construction noise, disturbances, things like that. We had to hire land use attorneys to get us through some challenging parts of the project, which I'll get into in a little bit. And then our lenders, and then of course our contractors who, like most of our projects, like Harry pointed out, in his project in Centra, Stiles Construction didn't build that project because they're not home builders, but we are retail builders, so we used Stiles Construction even though we went through the regular bidding process with other contractors as well. And the reason why we do that is because, like I said before, in development, we represent the partners on the project. So we have outside partners for each individual project, and our task as the owner's representative is representing their interests, not necessarily the interests of Stiles Corporation as a whole. Like we represent our partners. So again, yeah, here's the site. This is the existing site before we had done anything to it. So this was the old Holman Automotive dealership, and this was the car repair area. This was, which is was another kind of like one of those issues that comes up in your project. This whole area, at one time, the county thought maybe that it was considered wetlands, which we had to go through a very, very lengthy process of proving to them that it wasn't wetland, so that we didn't have to mitigate it and that there weren't any protected endangered species in the area. So, some of the things that I worked on, and this is from the beginning to the end on the project, and so as soon as we put the piece of land under contract, we had a 60-day due diligence period in which we had to investigate anything that we possibly wanted to investigate having to do with the project, where we would make the decision, are we gonna buy it or are we not? And a lot of that includes, we check the zoning, parking, landscape requirements, work with the architect, can we actually lay it out? Do we have a layout that Publix is going to use that's feasible to them? We order a survey, we check any title encumbrances. This particular site had a lot of challenges because, like I said before, it was really old and it had never changed hands. It had never been platted before, so we ran into quite a few title issues during the due diligence process. One in particular is that, if I go back here, this area right here, which we were using for overflow parking, that we needed to, not to meet the parking requirements of the municipality, but we needed these extra 41 spaces here to meet our tenants' parking requirements. It turned out that there was pieces of land that were crisscrossed all along this, like a little spider web, that we found out was owned by the city of Hollywood. So we had to go to the city of Hollywood, we have to say, you guys own this land, we need it. We had to go through, we had to prove to them that they didn't need it anymore, they had never used it before. Then we had to go all the way up to city commission to get it vacated. We had to contact all of there were utility easements there, we had to contact all the utilities, have them write us a letter proving they're not using it. I could get sign-offs from the city engineers and then present it to city commission. And again, the challenge is that we're trying to do all of this all within our due diligence period, because if we can't vacate that, then the property may not be usable to us. We may not decide that we want to buy it anymore. So that's kind of where a lot of those things, it becomes very time critical. So then going back to this, we performed environmental and geological testing on the property. As a used car dealership, obviously there were some environmental issues that we found. Normally what you do when you're getting this testing is we got what we call a phase 1. So we got our engineers to go out, perform some testing, and they said, you know what, we found some materials, it may or may not be harmful, let's do what we call a phase 2 test. So we sent them out, they did a phase 2 test, and they found that the materials there were the levels were low enough that you could still build commercial property on that, so we decided that that was okay for us. One of the things we also did is we performed geological testing, where and we discovered, unfortunately, that there actually on the eastern portion of the site was an extensive amount of muck, which is what it is, it's organic materials which are not structurally sound, so you can't build on them. So you actually have to go through, there's a couple processes that you can go through, which you can either completely remove them and bring in good soil. We actually looked into what we call like cement mix, concrete mixing, where you mix it with actually wet cement and then have it harden, which is, if you guys are familiar with the airport expansion that took place, there was a lot of muck in that area, and that is what they chose to do. And I actually had a unique opportunity to, the contractor who was performing that work on the airport runway, I got to go take a tour of that and see how they actually do the process, which was really interesting to me. So at the end of the day, we decided to demuck the property, and again, that's where the risk analysis comes in, because it ended up adding several $100,000 onto our budget. That that's where you're within this time period, and it's so critical because you have to decide, I'm trying to gather my costs, is it worth it, am I going to buy this property or not? Like I said, we ordered a traffic study, and then we worked with the utilities, which if any of you have before, working with the utilities can be somewhat challenging. They don't really have the sense of urgency that a private developer has. For us, time is money, and we're in a rush to get everything done. And it took a lot of meetings, a lot of begging and pleading for them to really focus on this project. And This one in particular was pretty extensive because, here, I'll show you. We had a cell phone tower here where we had to bury lines underground. We had to bring power to, we had 4 separate buildings we had to bring power to. We had overhead wires over here that we originally thought we were gonna have to bury and bring underground, but we actually found a way during construction to not do that and saved us about $75,000. We had 5 light poles along Sheridan that had to be shifted back, and we had a pole right about here that was right in the way of our building, and we had to get that relocated, which took us a long time. So it's, again, it's all of those things, your due diligence period can be very hectic because you're trying to figure out all of these things within a very short period of time. Not to mention, at the same time, you're trying to pressure your brokers and say, do you even have any tenants that you can bring me? Is this going to work out? Am I going to buy the property and you're not going to have any tenants here? You know, it's kind of, you're working a lot of different angles at one time. In the meantime, we started the site planning process. So we worked with the architect on the site planning and the planning process at the same time. So site planning, it's pretty straightforward. You go in, we went into the city of Hollywood. It's a 4-step process, takes about 8 months. We address all of their comments. We change the site plan accordingly and then go get those sign-offs. And when I get into a more specific time frame, which I have, we can talk about it a little more. The plating itself is also, you know, that's an interesting process to me because it, a lot of the, my understanding is a lot of the properties here, particularly in Broward or County or this area, they've all been platted before. It's very rare, I think, to find one that's never, ever been platted, which, you know, the platting is when you just kind of, you work with the county just to get it mapped out. You ensure that you're dedicating land to comply with the future land use plan. So it's actually, you see, it took us from, we submitted for the plat in April of 2012, and it wasn't completed until January of 2013. And I have been told that we really try to do it on an expedited time frame. It usually can take from start to finish up to a year. So when you're platting a property, what you do is, you know, you have to submit it to the city. They take a look and they look at all their future plans and say, oh, you know, we want you to dedicate some land for a turn lane, for a bus stop, for all these different things, and I'll show you on the map here. What we did, and you'll see once I show you the finished site plan, but we ended up having to build 4 turn lanes along Sheridan, 1 turn lane on Federal Highway, add a bus stop, and relocate a traffic signal on the corner of Sheridan and US 1. And it's through the platting process where you submit that to the city and the county, and then they send you back reports and they tell you what you need to dedicate, and then you try and fight some of it, or not fight some of it, but you try to say, hey, is this really worth it? Do we really need to do this? I can tell you that for the turn lane that we ended up building along Federal Highway, when we got our plat report from the county that said you need to build a turn lane, we took a calculated risk to hire a traffic engineer, have him submit a report, and go meet with the county and say, we don't think that that the traffic report saying that it's going to generate enough traffic for us to justify building a turn lane. So we actually submitted for a formal waiver process on that, which ended up being denied. So we actually ended up having to build the turn lane at the end of the day. But you know, it's permitting a turn lane and constructing a turn lane. It takes, you know, it's months in permitting. It's, you know, it cost us $50,000 just to engineer it, not to mention the construction. So it's really worth it. Those are the kind of things that you're trying every day when you're tasked with keeping your project on time and under budget. So, you know, all those things you're trying to fight for your money each day and bring the highest return that you possibly can over to the partnership. So, although that one wasn't successful, one of the things that was although we had to build 4 turn lanes here along Sheridan, when we actually got the report from the county, they said in our 25-year plan, we plan to widen Sheridan Street from 4 lanes to 6 lanes. So therefore, we want you to dedicate, they wanted us to dedicate, I think it was 25 or 30 feet along the front. So if you can picture dedicating that much land, it completely chopped our out parcels to where they weren't even developable. So what we did is we worked very, very closely with our engineer. We showed them, number one, that if we only dedicated 7 feet, then we could build all the required turn lanes that they were asking for. Then we went through a traffic ways waiver process where we formally submitted to the county and showed them, look, realistically, all these are, which you can't see very well, these are all single-family homes across the street over here. So if you're really gonna widen Sheridan to 6 lanes in the next 20 years, you're gonna have to like, take those properties through eminent domain. Are you really planning to do that? You know, it's just not feasible, and we did show the traffic counts of how much traffic was coming from Sheridan and how much was coming from Federal Highway, and said, look, it's really not feasible that you're gonna do this, so can we dedicate 7 feet in lieu of the 35 that you're asking for, then we can develop our property. And we actually had to take that to the county commission, and we succeeded, and we did get the waiver on the dedication requirement for that. So, and that took us about 3 or 4 months to do. So again, just going back to site plan approval, we submitted for that in April of 2012 and also got that in January of 2013 primarily because the city wouldn't approve our site plan until we had our plat approved at the same time. So then again, and a lot of these things are working simultaneously. So at the same time, you have a weekly meeting with your leasing agents and you say, you know, what kind of tenants are you bringing me? You know, you review all of the leases, you ensure that the lease terms are in line with what you've underwritten for the project. You know, you're negotiating the lease from the perspective of the landlord and from the long-term user, so you're making sure that the rents are right. Certain things you may go to the property manager and say, hey, they're asking for this, will this work for you? You get input from a lot of different departments. From the financial analyst, you kind of say, hey, this is outside of our underwritten terms. Do you think that this is okay with our lender or long term? And you work and you negotiate those. Then at the same time, which each case is different, one of the things I know that we try to do, and we did on this property, is that we put the land under contract and we don't close until we know that we are able to obtain the necessary government approvals. Because if we don't obtain the necessary government approvals, then we can't really build our project. So we have, you know, it's contingent upon being able to obtain those approvals. So we actually had this piece of property under contract for about 14 months before we closed on it. And again, it's because that long lead time is the platting process. So since the platting took about 10 months, and that's really why it was under contract for so long.
And also, maybe talk about just real briefly in respect to that is, did you have any sort of an option contract with the purchaser, and if so, what sort of generically speaking, sort of option contract fee you may have?
Yeah, generically speaking, we put it under contract, and then we had a deposit then for our due diligence period, and then after this first 60 days were up and we said, hey, we're going to move forward with purchase it, then we weren't able to waive any contingencies based on due diligence. So then we got into the government approvals period. So then you put down an additional deposit, and then you have up until a certain date to obtain your government approvals, and then otherwise you have to close. And quite frankly, at that time at the time it was for us to close, we were very close to getting our government approvals, but we didn't have them 100%. So we actually paid a week-for-week extension of a non-refundable, additional cost, and we extended the closing for about 4 weeks. And then it was contingent upon us obtaining the government approvals, and as soon as we did, we obtained our final government approval, our site plan approval on January 9th of 2013, and we closed in March, and it was just a matter of to get the closing together. So now for our closing, a lot of this responsibility actually falls within our, and this is particular to styles, I know each company is different, in our financial services department. So we have a financial services department that they do the paperwork. They go out and they find the partners. They put together, a package to pitch to different partners to say, hey, I have this project, it's in this location, we're partnering with Publix, we think it's gonna make this return, you know, this equity is required, do you wanna go in? And then they go and get the partners for us. Then once we have commitments from partners, then they do all of the formal, like legal paperwork to set up whatever type of partnership structure we've agreed to, whether, again, whatever it may be, and they work with the attorneys to file whatever, you know, state requirement paperwork there is, and they actually go out and obtain the loan on our behalf. And as a development manager, we are feeding them or providing them with whatever information that they need in order to get that done. But in development, we don't have any actual, we don't do that on a day-to-day basis. They're doing that for us.
Just real briefly, once again, kind of generically, roughly how many partners in the deal, and kind of roughly maybe what percentage ownership or that they would have? I mean, was it like a deal with 10 partners, 5 partners?
Well, I think different than what Harry's was, when that seemed like it was a 50-50 partnership with just him and Stiles. This one we had 2 other outside partners, and Stiles ourselves, we had a greater percentage of the partnership structure, and we were the managing partners on the project, and they were more like the equity partners, and they own a certain percentage of the project. So they have, like he said, partnership meetings where, you know, they're updated on the progress and the financial progress of the project, and how are we paying down our loan, when are you going to distribute us money, things like that. And then we also work very closely with the closing attorney on the transaction as it comes up to closing day, which I was not really prepared for quite the flurry of paperwork and back and forth, and how hectic it, you know, it really can get on a day-to-day basis, because you need to have all your insurance in place. So there's so many lender requirements, which include, I need to have contracts signed with my architect, with all of my consultants, with my contractor. I had to provide you know, executed contracts for all of those things. We had to provide copies of any leases that we had. You know, in order to obtain a loan, you know, you have to have certain commitments from quality tenants. At the time of our closing, we had an executed lease with Publix, with Starbucks, and with Pollo Tropical. So you know, that's again why you're in a everything leads up to the closing date. So not only, you know, you have to get these leases signed, you have to get your government approvals and get all these things in line so that it all comes together on this day, because your goal is to be able to put a shovel in the ground the day that you close on the property. So then, in the meantime, again, in conjunction with this goal here to try to put a shovel in the ground the day that you close, which, I mean, it's quite a task, so it doesn't always, time frame, it doesn't always work out exactly that way. But we did go in and bid out this project. So we put together a bidding package. We sent it out to 4 contractors, because I mean, obviously we want Stiles Construction to do our work, but like I said before, we're tasked with protecting the partnership. So we want to go with who's the lowest bidder. We responded to requests for information about our bidding package. We engaged the general contractor with a contract we did have hire Stiles Construction to do this. You know, they built, I want to say this is like their 28th Publix that they ever built. The team that I had in place specifically had Publix experience, which is important to the relationship with them, because Publix wants to know that they have a team in place that has experience that can deliver their projects on time. So we went and did that. Of course, in the meantime, concurrently at the same time, we're working on obtaining all the necessary permits. After you get your site plan approval, you have to get your permits. And there were, I mean, just major permits on this project. There were probably somewhere in the neighborhood of about 25 of them. That includes, with the city of Hollywood, I needed to get, first I got a clearing and grubbing permit, and all of this has to do with the timeframes and being able to start your work as soon as possible. So I knew I wasn't going to be able to get my building permit, so I would say, okay, well, what can I do to start work as soon as possible? So even a demolition permit wasn't enough. So I went in and I spoke with the building official and convinced convinced him, or he said, I said, what can you do to help me start construction soon? He said, I can issue you a clearing and grubbing permit, which basically allows you to remove the trees from the site, but it allows you to start work. So once we pulled that, we started doing that. And mind you, it's 14 acres, so it's still, I mean, it's quite a few weeks of work to do. So then we got our demolition permits. We had to get one per building. We demolished 3 buildings. Then we got a site work permit. Then we got building permits, 1 per building. We had retails A, B, C, and the Publix. We had to get our sewer, water, drainage, irrigation permits. Those took weeks. And then we had to get our FDOT permits, which they take an exceptionally long time to get approved, and I mean months. We had to get separate permits for our turn lanes, our driveway openings that we were constructing, and we had to get a signalization permit, which was to relocate the existing traffic signal that was on the site. Because we were building the turn lane, we had to shift it over from where it existed. And I can tell you that one of the things, as far as managing the risk of a project, like I mentioned before, we had tried to go get this waiver on building the turn lane over on Federal Highway, and we were not successful. So then we ended up having, we had to hire an engineer, we had to engineer it, we had to permit it. And at this time, since we had taken that risk and added that extra 4 months onto the project of not being able to get the waiver on that, we were kind of behind the curve when it came to designing and permitting the turn lane on Federal Highway and the signalization. And then not only that, but it took us 10 months to get the permit on that turn lane and that signalization, which is, it started to, frankly, it started to eat into the critical path of the project. Not having this permit started to put us on a day-for-day delay, to where it got to a point where we had to just go down to the office and beg and call in favors and holler and scream in order to pull this permit, because it had gotten to a point where we probably weren't going to, we thought we weren't going to be able to deliver the Publix on time. And it was very, very stressful. But we ended up pulling it. We actually, like I said before, we opened the Publix on April 24th, 2014. We didn't pull this permit until January, I think 13th of 2014. So we actually had to do all of that work within like 2 or 3 months, just rushing. I mean, it really was very stressful. Go ahead.
Did not having that permit keep you from being able to construct?
Not having the permit, it didn't keep us from being able to construct, to do the site work, the demolition, the site work, the construction. It just ended up, what happened is we just built everything except for this turn lane, pretty much. And I have some construction aerials on a time frame, and you can kind of see, I'll show you because I have them on. And so that those are the kind of things that on a day-to-day basis that you're trying to still manage with your project. So while everything's being constructed, we go out and have a weekly site visit. We respond to any questions that the contractor may have, clarifying any questions that they have as to what's going on. We coordinate between all the different parties. We review with the contractor's pay applications, and then we review and approve all of the construction loan draws. And then and again, at the same time, we are dealing with the broker, negotiating the leases, trying to time the build out so that they can open, as many can open as concurrently with the Publix as possible. And then, we wait for our certificate of occupancy, which, then you're getting a lot of requirements, things together for the city. We had to get like our new water and sewer system certified by the Broward Health Department. Just a lot of like paperwork and approvals and packages to put together in order to get your CO. And what we did in this case is we got a temporary certificate of occupancy for the Publix, because we had a date that we had to turn it over to them, and if we didn't make that date, then I couldn't go back to the office. So so I was down at the City of Hollywood all day long, down at the job site, running around doing whatever we could to really make sure that we met this date for them. And then subsequently afterwards, then we focused on the rest of the buildings. But for us, Publix, that was the one that we worked on a lot. I have several pictures of the site during construction, which I'll get into, and I'll come back to this after we talk about the projects, but here's just kind of a basic overview of some of the project financials. We purchased the land. We purchased it actually for $13,500. including the additional payments that we were talking about, some taxes and some other fees. We were in about 13.7 for 13.5 acres at the end of the day. That due diligence I spoke about, I spent about $75,000 on due diligence materials, and of $500,000 in architectural and engineering fees. And a lot of that was, again, that's where we're trying to manage our risks and manage our budget. At least $75,000 of that was due to that additional turn lane and signalization work that I had to do. The construction was roughly about $14 million. The government fees were about $700,000. I know it sounds high. That also includes about $234,000 of traffic impact fees that we had to pay to the county. It includes all of our building permit fees, all of our fees to the county, anything that was government related, including all the platting, which was about $78,000 total. Our loan and brokerage fees to broker and have construction administration on the loan was about $800,000. And then leasing and marketing, you pay those guys big bucks to get those tenants to your site. So we had about $1 million on that. And then legal, administrative, and development fees were about $800,000 for a total of, and this isn't exact, it's average, give or take a little, about $31.5 total for the project. In addition to the Publix, we had roughly 26,000 square feet of inline space, and our asking rents were between $28 and $38. And that rate, the reason why there's such a large range is the buildings that were farther back, which I have a complete site plan for you in a minute. We had some that were further back away from Sheridan Street. Those were the lower rates. And then we had some buildings right on the front on Sheridan Street that had higher visibility, and those were the higher rents, yes.
What was your actual budget?
What did I actually underwrite those at? Yeah. I underwrote them at 25 and 35. And with the exception of...
Oh, I'm sorry, about the total, costs altogether with construction and everything. What was your total budget that you were given in the beginning?
I think it was, I can tell you that we were about $1 million over budget. And I can explain some of those variances shortly. We had one very, very major surprise on the project, which cost us about $400,000.
Did you guys hold up? What was your contingency?
The contingency was 3%. We had about $500,000 in contingency. But then, yes, our asking rents 28 to 38, and then we had 4 out parcels with asking rents on ground leases from $150,000 to $225,000. So now I'll get into, I have, yeah, we have, yes?
Would a Pollo Tropical pay less than like the bank would?
Absolutely,
yeah. And
that's one of the challenges. We had a large challenge on the site because we had 4 out parcels. 2 we had underwritten for banks, and 2 we had underwritten for restaurants. It was during that time when we kind of got caught off guard because the banks weren't really constructing as much as they previously were. And case in point, I still have 2 out parcels available. So, and one has a Pollo Tropical, the ones that are taken for, one has a Pollo Tropical, and then one has a Wells Fargo. So we were about 50-50 in our projections there. So
what does Pollo Tropical pay? They're at the 150?
They pay a little bit less than that, and then the Wells Fargo actually paid quite a bit more than what we had underwritten it for, so we kind of made up for the 2.
Okay.
But our largest one that we had underwritten for $225, about halfway through the project, we had to kind of go back to our investment committee and make a presentation and say, we're not going to get this. The bank's not paying that right now. And we had to go back and then re-underwrite it at a different rent structure. So now I talked to you about some of the challenges on the site during entitlement. Yeah, we found a bunch of muck. We thought we might have had wetlands on site. It turns out that we had to hire a consultant and he told us no, there were not wetlands on site. We had to go through a process with the county showing them that, and then they ended up saying, okay, we agree with you, and they're not. Now, if they had found wetlands on the site, you have to mitigate them. You go through, you purchase credits from a mitigation bank, but the permits on that, again, that's where when you're trying to manage your time and your budget, the permits on that take probably as long as the FDOT permits would take. So we really, we're lucky that we didn't run into an issue with that. I told you about the plating process and the traffic ways waiver that we did, and then the title issues. The biggest problem that we faced on site, and I have some photos to show you a little bit later on, is that during the construction of the 4 turn lanes along Sheridan Street, our contractor ran into a 24-inch water main that the City of Hollywood's utility maps didn't indicate that they were in that location. We actually ended up having to relocate about 670 feet of that to the tune of roughly $400,000 is what it cost us. That was not budgeted, that was not expected. That fortunately, while the city was not very cooperative in our request to seek a recovery of some of our costs, they were very cooperative in working with us to get it addressed and fixed right away. So they went out on site and they approved it right away, the permitting. They worked with us overnight we had to do a line stop, a line tap, and relocate it. And they were very accommodating in fixing it in that regard, although we did have several meetings all the way up to the city manager trying to request assistance on that cost, and we didn't get any because the utility maps that we pulled said that the pipes were in a different location than where they actually were. The City of Hollywood also had a green building ordinance in which they required all developments of a certain size to be LEED certified. And this ordinance had come into place during the downturn when there wasn't a lot of development, and then when green building activity was becoming very popular. And we actually were the first building to go under construction in the City of Hollywood that was that this was a requirement for. Now, our company, our organization, we've built over 20 LEED certified buildings. We have a lot of LEED certified APs within our company. It's something that we really pride ourselves to work on. However, with a shopping center of that size, being LEED certified or becoming LEED certified is very challenging, and there's numerous challenges. Which, I mean, number one, while Publix is green friendly, all of anything having to do with LEED certification was borne on the developer, and then we actually were constructing their whole store. So since there were things that they wouldn't allow within their store, since we were constructing it, it would be difficult for us to actually obtain the certification. Additionally, we had 26,000 square foot of inline space. We had 16 tenants that we ended up with, and to manage their interior build-out process, we sort of lose control over that, and there's a lot of credits that we thought that we were in jeopardy of not being able to receive. So long story short, we met several times with the city's Green Building Committee, and we met with the city planning department, with the city manager to say, we're not opposed to incorporating certain sustainable building elements into the project. It's just that if you require the certification in order for us to build this project, there's so many things that are out of our hands that we lose control of. We really can't do that. So we worked out something where we actually had to submit for a waiver through City Commission and show them that we were actually incorporating or attempting to incorporate enough sustainable elements into the project that we would have achieved LEED certification. We had to aim to show them we were aiming for 40 points, really. And so then what I had to do is I hired a green consultant, and I worked with my engineers, and I had to submit a package. Every single thing that we told the city that we were going to do, I had to submit a package proving to the city that I actually did it, and I had a binder in the building official's office, and I went once a month with all my little green packages, and they were stamped by my engineer, they were signed by my green building consultant, and then I went and submitted them electronically and hard copy to the building official to show them that we were basically complying with what the waiver was and what we told them that we were going to do. I actually have one left that I just had my consultants out there working on just on Thursday, and getting ready to close that up. So, and then again, of course, the signalization work, I think what I told you about with obtaining the permits and whatnot. So, I think now.
Looks like fun.
Another question.
Yes.
On the construction costs that you had up there for $14 million, did that include like the TI for the tenants that you already had lined up, like Publix?
That included, yes, that included the TI that I had
It
done.
seems like an awful, like the per square foot on that is very.
Well, I can also, another thing that, well, again, in a lot of things that that included the $400,000 that I just talked about for that water relocation. We had a lot of site work challenges. Again, that muck removal that I discussed was quite a few $100,000. Then when the water line relocation, not only that, we had to, because it was we had to end up changing the size of our drainage structures and swapping them out, and then certain ones weren't available anymore, so we couldn't return them. There was a lot of, this is an all-in number really, and the site work itself, the original contract was about $6.1 million, and then with those add-ons that I just talked about. So the site work costs were exceptionally high.
As you had to fully comply with the greening up ordinance, how much extra would you have had to have spent in the project?
I think that we were estimating the neighborhood of maybe like $50,000 to $100,000, and because a lot of the things that we did end up incorporating, but then also there's fees for the USGBC, and to us, it wasn't so much about the money, it was the losing control of it and not being able to get like our, getting our CO or things like that, and just giving that it's subjective to like an outside party as opposed to the city and then ourselves. It's one thing to build a building and then you want to get it LEED certified, but to make it a requirement of being built was really the challenge for us.
And what level of LEED were they requiring?
They were requiring just certification at that point. Mm-hmm.
When you compare this site analysis, the muck against the cement, I mean, what was the difference, the actual, besides time?
I want to say the cement mixing ended up getting into like over $1 million was the additional cost. So we went with, but it was quicker. So then when we finally figured out that we could actually do the actual demucking and for less and then keep our time frame, then that's what we went with. So these are construction aerials. I have them month by month, side by side from two different angles, showing. So this is the existing property. I'll go through some of them pretty quickly. Of the old car dealership. And this is when we had just started to do some of the clearing and grubbing that I just talked about. And you can see we had our cell phone tower here, which was in the middle, which we could not relocate even though we tried, because it has to be at least 400 feet away from any residence, so that was like the only space that it could go. And it was already existing, it was there. So this is in July of 2013. Then in August, you can kind of see it going up. This is now we're getting into November. Oh, so now this is something, these are construction photos. So there was a white site wall around the entire property, and this was decorated in the backside all along the entire back of the property. So we ended up having to demolish these things here. This is kind of during demolition. This is this Hollywood sign, I'll tell you, because it was like such an iconic car dealership in that area and it was gateway to the city. I had to field so many telephone calls from residents of the city of Hollywood that wanted to keep the Hollywood sign, and they wanted to like put it in their backyard, and I wanted to, but logistically it didn't turn out, and unfortunately we ended up throwing it away. These are gumbo limbo trees, 8 of them going to the cell phone tower that they were so mature that we had to root prune them, relocate them to one portion of the site while we constructed the building, and then root prune them again and then relocate them to their final destination afterwards. And out of the 8, 6 of them survived. This is a kind of an idea of like unexpected things that happen when you're working. These are things that the contractor would call me and say, I just found this when I was digging, I don't know what it is, and it's not in my budget, and it may cost you extra to remove it. So we were constantly fielding calls like that from these weird things that we just like found in the ground while we were constructing. Underground. This was one of the poles that was in the way that took us forever to get FP&L to relocate, so much that we actually started building and laying down asphalt all around it before it got removed, and we had to end up calling them every day, like 3 times a day, like, please, when are you going to come remove this? So that was challenging. This is the signalization I was talking about, relocating the traffic signal. So we actually had to move it a little bit over, and this is showing you how deep the foundation needs to be for one of those things. So when you see those traffic lights and you look and you think about, like, it was 25 feet down, and then with cement and everything, and this is, well, when it was being done, this is one of the contractors going down below and doing work on that. These are our drainage structures, which kind of shows you like how, I mean, they're almost as tall as I am, really. This is I said you always are getting unexpected and bad news happening on your site. So this is the faces of my boss and I every time, not every time, but several times when we had to go visit the contractor. And then they were telling us things like, we just found a water line, or it's taking 10 months to get your permit. So this was kind of a joke of the site, and they had a picture of this hanging in their construction office because this was often our faces as we were leaving. This is the 24-inch water main that I was talking about that we had to relocate. And this is a picture of, we performed something that was called a line tap, where this guy here, this is the pipe, and he got down and he had to cut into the pipe and then put in, you know, a piece of metal to stop the water. We had to turn it off on one side and then connect it to new pipe that we were, you know, constructing and kind of shift it together without interrupting like the flow of water. So we had to do a portion of that work, what we call the turnover. We actually had to do it in the middle of the night because that's when nobody in the city is taking showers, and, you know, it's the least disruptive to the neighborhood. But this was just a huge piece of work and disruption to something unexpected to the site that we had to deal with. Another unexpected thing, you know, interesting stories, and I have a lot of lessons learned on this site. And this is my superintendent here, and you know, it turns out that we built the parapet, the facade of the Publix, and then we took a crane and we installed our HVAC units, and the height of the facade did not cover the HVAC units. You could see them from the street, which is against code. It's a big no-no. So we actually had to, at an additional cost, raise the height of the parapet after we had constructed it. And this is myself, my architect, and the superintendent went out to the site on a Saturday. We measured this piece of cardboard here, and he stood it up next to where the HVAC units are, and me and the architect had to go all the way across the street and take pictures to make sure to see if you know, you could see it from across the street or not. I mean,
the same architect on?
No, I don't. No, and but you know, we did calculations and whatnot, but it was just kind of one of those things where now I'll never have a project where I don't say, did you double check the line of sight?
Isn't the architect liable for any additional costs that would incur?
That's a long story. We had a lot of discussions about that, so, and we worked it out at the end. Then here's you know, some other pictures during construction. This is the interior. This is ended up being right now we have under construction a Chipotle restaurant, so that's scheduled to open within the next few months. This is when I was taking the last class, your last cohort on site when the project was under construction. This is a nice panoramic shot we got of the Publix while you know, we had the joists in but not the slab poured yet. And then I have a few, so then this is after, you know, we were dried in and the slab was poured, and then once the terrazzo floors were done, what it looked like. And then once the equipment started going in, and then once it was getting ready to open. There's installing all the electric for the Publix. And then this was us on our opening day. So, and then this is a site plan now of what it ended up looking like. So like these are the buildings where we were asking in the 20s for rent, and then this is where we're asking in the 30s. And then there's our out parcels there. So some of the tenants we have are UPS, we have a Publix liquor store, Space Coast Credit Union, Orange Leaf Frozen Yogurt, an AO Wireless, Starbucks, Chipotle, Banfield Pet Hospital, Wells Fargo, and the Pollo Tropical.
Mm-hmm. What is Publix paying rent?
That I would rather not say. But I'll tell you all the other ones. Do you have any other questions?
Did your costs, the construction costs, include the build out for the construction of the Pollo and the Wells Fargo as well?
No, we ground lease those, so we just lease the land to them, and then they were responsible for all of the construction costs on their own.
two blue spots are the ones that are not,
Those are the ones that are still available. Mhm. Do you have any more questions about it?
Any other questions? All right, what we're gonna do now, I just want to give Jessica a round of applause. Let's go ahead and have a couple of the folks that did the quick sort of front door, back door, kind of get up and briefly discuss what they did, what they found, and then we'll kind of go from there. So, Mark, we'll start with you.
since you're in front.
I was way off though.
And I think yours is, it's already been loaded up, so, yeah.
No pressure.
Well, I was way off on the cost, but I can definitely tell
Hold
you.
it up a
what
little bit so we can,
I- Zoom in.
yeah, zoom in.
So I just, as far as the front door, looked at the acquisition costs at 13.5, and my development cost was way low because I just sort of looked at RS means. I didn't factor in for the, I'm sure the demolition costs and a lot of the site work. So I kind of looked at it just as raw land and not any of those site issues. And so I was looking at a construction cost of about $86 a square foot for the anchor and $78 for the inline. That's not including any TIs. So that gave me a total of 6.6, and then I had about a $7 for just for site costs on the out parcels.
I mean, Jessica, didn't you say that the original construction budget without all of the extra added stuff was in that roughly that 6 million-ish?
Well, that was our contract for the site work only.
Oh, site
Now,
work
for the
only.
Publix and retails, our original contract was $6,040,000. So the two together, it was about, roughly 13, and then when you add the extra stuff in, I got it close to 14 million.
Okay, so the site work is where I was way low on those.
And one thing to keep in mind is that the site work, for this project was extraordinarily higher than what is normal, so.
Okay, and based on that, I looked at some sort of industry standard as far as what's available as far as this type of financing, and I saw typically they're looking at about 75% loan to value. I used a 5.5 interest rate at 15-year amortization, and I did they had, which I thought was a little higher than usual, that what we've been looking at was a 1.4 debt service coverage ratio. And based on vacancy rates in the submarket at a 93% occupancy, that gave me a required rent at about $18 a square foot, which was comparable to some of like the older buildings and older retail stores in the submarket. Then I also, let's see, beyond the construction costs, I also added in what I thought would be some typical development costs. Obviously the soft costs, architecture and engineering, some of the permit fees based on City of Hollywood standards, and just what it might have cost for the interest and real estate taxes, insurance. My marketing and commissions was very low according to what Jessica said. And then I had some legal and contingency.
Now, did you put when you say 2%, that was 2% of what the?
Of a 10-year lease, so.
We will normally budget, standard is 6 and 3, 6 on the first 5 years, 3 on the second 5 years, and then when you get an outside broker or a national tenant, for a national tenant, they'll frequently ask for an additional percentage point, so we budget a mix of between 6 and 7.
Okay, so, let's see. And so that gave me that total development cost of 9.5 as far as my my backdoor analysis, I plugged in those numbers, same occupancy, and with my, let's go back here. Based on market rents, I looked at what was, CoStar had quoted a $19, 98 cents per square foot average, so I looked at some other public anchor tenants and shopping centers, which was averaging about $27 a square foot. So I sort of did like a backdoor approach to figuring out what Publix might have been paying without knowing, and Jessica's not going to tell us. So I came up with about $16, and so that gave me an overall. I figured that into based on the square footage. That gave me a total NOI with the out parcels and the Publix and the inline, gave me a total sort of potential gross income of 2.6, and based on all triple net, so it gave me a NOI at about 2.4. Same debt service coverage ratio and LTV. I came up with a maximum supportable site acquisition of 14 million, and again using that same 9.5 development cost. I also did a quick sort of valuation on it based on a 7% cap, would have given me 35 million, which is closer to what your development cost would have been. So I had a potential added value of 11 million. That's it.
Hey, Dustin, you want to do this a little bit as well?
There's a lot.
It's just the Excel spreadsheet.
You closed it out, huh?
I close out.
Okay.
Go ahead and blow yours up as well. A little bit more. My eyes don't want to.
So I looked up. I mean, we saw what the property sold for, the 13.5, and then same thing went to CoStar, or not CoStar, LoopNet, and for the inline, I tried to be really conservative on the numbers, but I saw stuff ranging from like 20 to 27, so I just picked the middle. The out parcels, kind of the same thing. Just took on those, I spoke to a broker about that, and he's the one that told me they spent about 180 to 220 for banks.
Mm-hmm.
And then I just figured with Styles' reputation and everything, he can get a better interest rate. Debt service will be better. Same to loan to value. And I came up with my $24. I did put in here on the operating expenses. I know that's triple net, but I just put the leases in there, like leasing rental rate. So that would be like an annual thing. So put the commissions in as part of the operating expenses. And then on the back door, I just I did a little bit. I changed the backdoor approach since I knew what the site acquisitions costs were. I wanted to know what I could spend on construction instead. So I just changed it, and then I got my total construction costs. I was way low on the construction, even on the front door. I did the RS means, and then I added, 40% for soft cost, and I still came to 9 million. Now, but I put that 40 for site work, parking. It was much higher than that. But that's how I approach this. I don't know. Is there any questions?
Perfect. Great.
Good job, man. Why was the site work so high?
Well, again, primarily it was the size. I think the size of the site, the fact we had to build 5 turn lanes. Add the.
So you'd say most of the site work that was additional outside your actual parcel was the actual cost of your site work? Because I don't see the site work being that crazy for anyway.
Well, the largest one was the muck removal. That was,
Yeah,
that was,
okay.
that was the
Yeah.
biggest one. And then, you know, we constructed 5 turn lanes total, and then the signalization work was about $96,000 on its own. So those were that, and then, you know, the surprises. And then also, another one, which is, just due to, one thing that I had said before is that, the Publix that was moving from across the street was because they flooded all the time. And we basically had to like guarantee the Publix that this site was not going to flood.
Right.
And so what we had to install 11 injection wells on site, which they were 170 feet down below the ground. Each one of them, I think just the materials was $31,000. We had to permit them extra. So that again was just another added cost just to make sure that the site could drain properly, because the place is notoriously known for flooding in that area.
Moving forward, would you increase your contingency budget? I think you said it was like $500,000. It's usually 5%.
Yeah, no, because the things that caused the project to go over budget, mostly was like that water line relocation. We wouldn't have been able to know anyway, so it's not like you would want to carry extra money for, you have carry extra money for things, there's always something that's unknown, but like another thing that ate up a part of my contingency, which now, you know, you do these things, like these lessons learned, I won't do this again, is that I had a quote for the traffic impact fees early on during the due diligence period, and I didn't know that in October of each year they go up. And that year, when I paid them, they had gone up 30%. So I had an extra, I think extra $60,000 of what I had to pay, and I tried, you know, so hard to go back, but it was like, you know, where voted we. So now I know, I put a reminder in my calendar in October saying, go double check and see if impact fees have increased. You can put it into the budgets for all of your projects. So, you know, a lot of it was things that I learned that I will now, there was a myriad of things, like in things that, you know, your architect should get, or your other consultants that don't know, like I didn't have power, all my monument signs were supposed to be lit, and I had no power going to them, and so it was kind of like, at the last minute, we're like, oh, we have to get power out to these monument signs, or I had one that was in the way of an FPL easement, so I had to shift it up 10 feet, and because it was part of my lease exhibit to the Publix lease, I had to go back to them and say, and they said, well, you have to do a lease amendment, so just because I moved the monument sign 10 feet, you know, and things like that, so.
Did you see that the as-bills were up to date and like, I guess, usable?
Oh, yes, we
The more
have.
renovations you go through, the more you change land, there's a lot of lines and things you run into that aren't necessarily on the plans.
Well, because this was like a ground up development, you know, once we finished, now we have a full set of as-bills that all the contractors gave to us and the consultants.
What was the comparison between what you budgeted versus actually what you spent?
Actually, you know, it's funny because you say, oh, it was over budget a little bit, but at the end of the day, it was in between 2 and 3% that it was over. So, you know, it's not.
And then your rents making up for it.
Yeah, and all of our rents all of the inline rents were above pro forma with the exception of one, and that was one that we made because they had exceptional credit. So that, you know, those are the kind of things that you go and you work with your financial services department, and you say, okay, well, he's gonna take this one space, it's $1 less, but the credit is so good, the cap rate will go down, you know, we can sell it for more, you know, what do you wanna do? Would we rather have a mom and pop tenant? No, you know, no. So I think we have a nice mix of nationals and mom and pops. So.
Good.
You actually brought up a really interesting point just then about the cap rate going down by virtue of the type of tenancy we have. Could you, I guess, just real briefly kind of, talk about that in the sense that obviously for each tenant, depending on what their credit rating is, that is going to dictate obviously their what you may be able to sell the property for because of the ability to sort of count on that rent always being paid.
No, it's very important when you are, I mean, not so much when you're underwriting, but then when you're bringing in the tenants and improving the deals, because you know, the greater credit worthiness that the tenant has, you know, the more valuable it is to a purchaser, so the lower the cap rate's gonna be. And we do it because it's a large shopping center. We do it like as a mixed blended cap rate. So you can't say, oh, now it goes down because you brought in Chipotle, or you know, it's kind of depends on the mix of tenants. But one big thing for us is it like a corporate tenant versus a franchisee, because a franchisee you can only get personal guarantee for, so whatever your value, your net worth is, versus like if it's a corporate tenant, then we can have, you know, a guarantee from the corporation, which is more valuable to us. But then it's, you know, you wanna have a nice mix of, you know, mom and pop tenants also, and then, but, you know, what's interesting is when you're dealing with those kind of things, like the credit tenants, they know, and they know that you sort of need them to a certain extent. That's why I said, like a broker demands a higher commission, and then, you know, and they'll say, fine, we'll just go down the street. You know, it doesn't matter to them, so as long as you pay them more, then they will, you know, promote your shopping center. Or, you know, the national tenants will really stand firm on, you know, we need this much TI, we don't negotiate, you know, we don't negotiate. So then sometimes you ask yourself, well, who's the landlord and who's the tenant? You know, it's you know, different than, you know, if you're renting out houses, really. So, because they end up dictating a lot of things, and particularly early on in the site, like when I had mentioned that in order for us to get our construction loan, we needed to have signed leases. We had from Publix, we had from Pollo, we had from Starbucks, and when it came down to it, like they'll tell you that Starbucks, they knew that we needed them to get our construction loan. So then when you're down to like your last 3 points of negotiations, and it's something that seems so ridiculous, and then, you know, you gotta look at the big picture, like they might fight you over, you know, our opening hours, or it's just minor things, you know, like, we get our own trash dumpster, or things that they normally, they'll say, oh, we don't follow those rules, and then finally you're like, I gotta have this thing signed by next week, I don't care, give them whatever they want, you know, you know, you get worn down to where you just end up, because you have to look at the bigger picture and how it impacts your site. So.
The financing and the debt service coverage ratio on the LTVs, is that, like, is that
Can I speak to
what
those?
you guys were doing, or?
Yeah, I think that you were right in the sense that yours were close. And I think the loan to value we had 75. The interest rate was a little bit lower than that, and we did you know, just a construction. We didn't do permanent financing. We did a construction loan just at this point. So, however, but Mark, you were closer on the Publix rent. So.
All right, thank you again, and, good, Kevin, you have anything else you need to?
No, that's about it,
Come back in the phone.
Okay, I will, when my next project is complete.
What is that one?
Yeah, I have, right now I have one that's under construction, that I'm just kind of, we don't know, I'm just doing like all of them. And I have 2 that are under getting government approvals right now. One's very similar, old car dealership, I'm cladding, I'm getting all the.
Being there than that.
Yeah, they say, oh, you're, at first they're like, oh, you're the grocery store girl, now they're like, you're the used car dealership.
Alright guys, I'm gonna make a blog spot for the blogs section of this course. So it'll make just 5 blogs that can be split between today and the site visits we're going on the week after next. So just 5 between those. You can look at other people's blogs, how they're done before, and some of you have done.
We do both. We do sell a lot of things, and some, a lot of people hold on to.
5.
So I think in general.
Or today, as a company, that's how it's determined whether they want.
So you can do one on me.
Each person has to do 5?
What our partners want to do. Then also, what's the cost of permanent
Half the people are not even listening.
Then another thing that we take heat for is
Okay, can you explain that again?
long-term, we have property managers, we have,
Yeah, just 5 and
one
one
property
between,
long-term,
or however many you
kind of
want
like,
between
you know, we
today
have
and
property managers
2 Saturdays.
employed, you know, are they getting our third-party work, you want to keep that on, and then really like the market.
After the last day.
Oh, okay, and I'm soliciting offers about the market.
You said 5 blogs?
Yeah, 5 people.
Like, oh, yeah.
Yeah, I'll send out a link tomorrow with, it's just longspot.com.
Because I know that this whole email will have
subscribe or something, or it's like, join my blog.
Yeah, it's the same. It's the same.
Okay, yeah, it's okay.
I'll send you the
Thank you.
I'm Tyler.
Oh,
Actually.
yeah, I think we met.
Yeah, we did. That's what I find out my neighbors, but I don't do, so it's cool to see how you guys deal with like the same more stuff than I do.
Is that you can do that then?
Technically, because you're dealing with
But it's been a
nature
while.
doing a lot of stuff in the county. It's just,
Mark? I have a quick question. So,
but anyway, it's.
And where do you say?
Cool, thank you. I've always been in real estate